Hey all, and welcome to the Skeptic Hangout, the place where we sit back, relax, and discuss some of humanity's most controversial and intriguing concepts through the lens of skepticism. We have with us today Richard Gilliver from Skeptic Takeout, Laura McGee from Unapologetically Me, and Richard Gill from the Yorkshire Atheist. Today, we are going to be talking about research. So grab your English tea or your mango smoothie and join us as we unpack all of the ways that we, figure stuff out. This is episode 16, Research. So, hey, gentlemen, how is it going today?
I'm good. Yeah, it's getting warm in Britain, and it's unheard of.
I've been actively sweating. Well, I think on the day of recording, it's the hottest day of 2021 so far in Britain. So, and because we're such a small country, we have homogeneous weather just everywhere. So it's just hot.
Oh my goodness. Well, I live in a desert, so that's like pretty much
But yeah, so we're saying
quo.
hot, but it's like winter temperatures for Nevada, I imagine.
I don't know. Yeah, anything below 70 is like delicious. But anyway,
I don't know, like my brain works in Celsius, so it's been like 23, 24 degrees here, but I don't know what that is in.
Yeah, I can't do the conversion. I know that 0 degrees is like 32 degrees, like 0 Celsius is 32 Fahrenheit or something like that.
Someone can fill us in on the Facebook
Oh my God. Yeah, please guys help us out, because if there's one thing I'm not, it's good at converting between Celsius and Fahrenheit. And I don't even know why we still use Fahrenheit. We are so behind the times.
But that's a separate podcast from the one that we're on now.
So actually that leads right into research. Hey guys, go out and research the conversion between.
Yeah. So I think we should start by kind of giving a brief overview of what we think research is, because it's got so many connotations, especially in this day. I mean, it's something we touched on in the science episode. It's something we touched on in the social media episode from very different viewpoints. Mm-hmm. So what in general do you consider research to be?
Oh, it's not just when you type it in Google and you get an answer? Shit.
That's how I got through my degree. No, but I think it can be that sort of research can be a big formal sort of, very formulaic sort of pattern of we do this and this and this and this to get a result in a very specific and provable sort of way. Whereas research can be like asking your friends things, or it can be, it depends what your goal is in your research, doesn't it? If you're researching specifically, like, because research could be like, I'm checking out my friends' opinions on what we should do when we meet up in the summer, or that can be research to research people's opinions, as opposed to things like all the COVID vaccine stuff at the moment, where people are doing specific scientific research, and that's maybe one of the distinctions, isn't it, between sort of non-scientific and scientific research.
And like you said, casual and not casual, like researching where we're going to go on vacation this summer, like you're right, like research can take on various forms.
Even down to the most basic level of saying, hey, Google, what noise does a dog make? I expect
you didn't say okay, Google.
Yeah, she's multilingual. She can do it both ways. Okay. I think one of the kids has unplugged it. Notice how, just going wildly off topic, notice how I said she.
Yeah,
I know, right? And it's a computer algorithm. That's kind of crazy. Well, we're getting prepped for when AI becomes just a regular everyday thing, right? So our brains are already sort of being prepared for that eventuality.
But yeah, it can be the most basic thing. If you want to find out, what the temperature is, and just typing it into Google or looking on your weather app, that in a way is a form of research. You're trying to find an answer to a question.
And even like I did. Because I've got a degree in linguistics, and I did for my dissertation, I did a sociolinguistic analysis of North Halifax English. So like I did here is not North Halifax English, Halifax English. So here is the variety of English spoken in Halifax, and I described it, and I did all this stuff. So as part of that, I had to do some research into various things. So I did some rapid anonymous surveys where I went into Halifax Town Centre and had people read lists of words out, and I recorded their answers. But then I did some phonological interviews, like Lebovian style interviews, where I sat down and had sort of open informal conversations with people that I recorded, and then I had to phonologically transcribe things that they said. So I like listened to exact vowel sounds and things that they said and wrote those down. And like, so even as part of the same sort of dissertation project for that, I did very different styles of research in terms of I did my academic reading of sort of papers and previous studies of Yorkshire English of other varieties, and I did obviously my field work as well as my interviews and stuff like that, as well as looking at sort of the academic start, the stuff that helped me actually get answers from the stuff that I'd done the field work in and all. So there were so many different forms of research just in that one project. That sort of tells you then how many forms of research there are sort of generally when I had so many in just one thing.
No, that's true, because even same deal here, when I was finishing up my bachelor's in cultural anthropology, my topic was reasons why people say that they're atheists. So it's not why are there atheists or what reasons are there for atheism. It was what reasons people give, like sociological, cultural reasons that people give for being an atheist. And it was the same thing. I did polls, I did surveys, I did interviews. I did a lot of research into what research has already been done. And then I did comparative studies in terms of, okay, well, I'm looking at the cultural anthropological aspect, but there's the biological aspect, there's the psychological aspect, and what studies have been done in those fields. And then what studies have been done in the philosophical, right? And so, yeah, I think in terms of research, there is no one size fits all. Like even within a single study, that was a really good point to make.
Yeah, and I think within academic research, which is what we're talking about here,
at the moment,
yeah, it's great to have that variety, and it doesn't matter, as you've both spoken about, it doesn't really matter what area, whether it's linguistics or anthropology, or in my case, religion and philosophy. There's so much to look at. You can, when I'm doing research on religion, I can be looking at papers on architecture, looking at the architecture of religious buildings and things. It's such a wide range and area when you're doing it at that level. That it's so. I was going to say so much fun. It's so much fun for me. Other people will probably find it boring. Although I have read academic papers on the way classical music is constructed, and that is boring.
Ooh. Unless you're really into classical music and into that kind of technical side.
For me, that was boring. So, and I love music. I'm a musician myself, but I still found it tedious. But go on, Richard.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of the ways that most people sort of have a door into sort of research as things is you get like headlines, don't you, of researchers found that people who sleep with a mobile phone under their pillows are 40% more likely to get brain cancer and die, or researchers have done, and you get those sort of headlines of like researchers have shown this, or researchers proved that this, and I think it's interesting because sometimes people are specifically trying to find things with a purpose, aren't they? So like my Halifax English study was very specifically trying to find out a thing about a thing. And sometimes people do come across things by accident, but yeah, I think research isn't just about finding new things. Sometimes it is just about consolidating what we as a society, as humanity, or sort of already know about something, which it can seem boring because it's not a quick thing to do, is it? Like it takes a lot of time and a lot of reading of things which are not necessarily the easiest of reads.
Right.
No. And I don't know about you two guys, but when I've been constructing my essays, a good, I'd say 70-80% of the time is reading the papers and doing the research.
Oh, predominantly. Yeah. So
like going filter through for the one sentence which is going to be in some way relevant to what you're actually talking about.
going back to what Gil said just a minute ago, I think it's kind of cool to draw sort of a distinction. And I'm not saying there's these only two, like it's a dichotomy, but
Yeah.
the two types of research you were talking about, like what you did was more descriptive, right? Whereas what other people are doing is trying to say prove a point or demonstrate a truth or hey, this medicine does this or has these side effects, right? So there's the research that's trying to discover something or answer a question. And then there's the research that's just trying to describe something the way that it is. And it's not really trying to prove anything, or it doesn't really have a question to answer.
Yeah,
Or
there's
might,
no motive behind my dissertation, whereas some people
right.
do start out with that question of like, does a mobile phone under your pillow affect your health in any way? I'm making that stuff up, but I'm
Yeah,
definitely
disclaimer.
thinking about that. But yeah, I think there is that thing of research can be focused and pointed, as opposed to mine, which was in that case just more descriptive.
And on that point, and which I think we touched on this a bit in the science episode we did as well. The thing is, which you've just said there, you do get headline kind of research stuff, and I think a lot of the problem is that a lot of people don't go past the headline. When you're flicking through, you might be sat on the internet or flicking through a magazine or whatever, and you get the headline of, mobile phones cause cancer or whatever, and you get that, and then a lot of people just read the article if it interests them, and that's it. They don't take that extra step of further study, and that is a shame, really, because unfortunately, that's used to manipulate. I don't want to go all conspiracy, but that is used to manipulate us by the people who are selling magazines and selling the headlines. They'll have a really eye-catchy headline, which sometimes has nothing to do with the actual story itself. I'm thinking about, I've seen a lot recently about the UFO stuff, because the Pentagon's about to release a lot of UFO files, and there's so many kind of headlines out there, really like otherworldly.
Oh yeah, like proof of UFOs about to be unveiled
and
or
when
whatever.
You read
and it's
the
like
story, it's got nothing to do with what you expect. It's nothing to do with alien spaceships. Or I read one the other day about fast. I'm not sure what they call it in astronomy. Fast radio burst, I think it was, being discovered recently, and they were making it. It's just a natural anomaly in space, but the headline really made it. It was something along the lines of alien signal from outer space, and
what they mean by alien is not originating on Earth. Yeah, and you have to read it to find it out. Yeah.
It's written in such a way to draw you in and kind of get you reading those articles and get the clicks or the magazines or the newspapers or whatever sold. And it's manipulative and it's dishonest.
And ultimately, doesn't it add to the whole distrust of media in general, where it's like, oh, you can't really trust media, and then you have these examples of these things where they're misrepresenting what it is that they're talking about, or you have the researchers who do the research and the scientists, and they present this data and then, or data, however you want to put it. And then the journalists come and they take that and they put their own spin on it and they add stories to it and they sort of editorialize
it. Can be the other way around as well, though, can't it? Where people also then, it can lead people to mistrust scientists in the scientific process, because there'll be a headline like, scientists have shown that, our research has proven that ducks are 40% more likely to be right-wing than left-wing. And and then suddenly people are like, what on earth are we spending all this money on scientists for? Because they're just coming up with these random things where that might have been, I mean, I don't know about the political beliefs of ducks. I'm not a massive...
or how their wings are arranged.
I haven't undertaken that research personally, but like, people can see that and it then sort of muddies their opinion of scientists or science as a thing. So I think that's sort of the flip side of what you were saying, Laura.
Yeah, or it goes alongside it. Like, I think it actually runs parallel to what I'm trying to say, is that when you have this very sensationalized way of presenting research, I think it really does shake people's trust in it. Like, I know I had a conversation with a family member just recently where they said, well, scientists are no more reliable than theologians or people who follow a religion. So it's almost like if I follow Christianity, it's just as good as you following your scientists. They're all people trying to present what reality is, and they don't know any more than we do. And when you
Which
really boil it down,
makes sense. It sounds sensible.
Yeah. Well, and especially because they're maybe talking about specific scientists and specific instances where information was presented as facts when it was still in the like the hypothetical stage, or they're still kind of arguing it or trying to figure it out. And like what he used as an example is how often periods of time have changed for the dating of, say, like dinosaurs or other fossils. And it's like, yeah, because we're getting better and better at our methods. But you're right. If you talk about what scientists were saying 100 years ago, it is just as much of a guess as like following a religion. So you kind of are making a good point.
I've had the conversation with people before who were lovely people, religious people, absolutely lovely, not the kind of apologist kind, just general, average Joe religious people, who've genuinely come out and said, oh yes, scientists have said though that the speed of light is getting faster. And it goes back to what you were saying. It's not getting faster. It's just been refined. The methods of measuring it have been refined, and
we're recalculating it.
Yeah. And they've just Go on.
No, I keep interrupting you. Go
ahead. I was just going to say it's just a misinterpretation of the way you should read things. There's a great resource out there called Google Scholar.
I love Google Scholar. Yeah,
it's fantastic for finding stuff. I encourage everybody who doesn't use it, who's looking for stuff, rather than just using a search engine. If you're trying to answer an academic question, go to that, because it gives you, and it does have its flaws, and I'll get to the flaws in a second. But it's really good because it'll bring up a list of the relevant papers and things. It'll tell you how many times they've been cited, and which is a good kind of reference source to how reliable the information in them is, because it shows trust in that paper from other academics. And if you do have an academic facility, you can actually sign into it through that and because a lot of the results are sometimes they may be just the opening to the papers or whatever. You may not have access to the full thing. If you've got the access to an academic facility, you can go in there and sign in and read the full things. But it does have its drawbacks. I mean, I did a search recently for the biblical account of Exodus, and it brought up a huge list of results. But out of like maybe 10, 12 of the first results, there were only 2 of them that were actually academic papers. Mm-hmm. You do have to look at it. Will tell you the publication it's been put forward in, so on Google Scholar. So if you have a look, it will actually tell you the publication, and you can see whether that's a reputable journal. And a lot of the cases with the research I did was just showing you books that had been published.
Yeah, so
that could be anybody.
I was about to say that brings up a really good point when you're talking about research, because unless you're a researcher where you've been trained how to do research and how to check the reliability of these different sources, like a lot of people will see maybe like it might have a website like scientificjournal.com, right? And that sounds, scientific journal, that sounds reputable, that sounds good. And it says that, eating turtle shell soup is healthy for your brain, so I'm going to do it, right? But the problem is knowing when a source is actually like a good source and they're well vetted and they like to have their stuff challenged and peer reviewed, or whether it's sort of an echo chamber for an ideology or an organization.
That's exactly the point I was going to make, because like you can get. So here's an example. So I am obviously I've got my linguistics degree, but as a teacher, I specialize in languages, so I speak French and German. And so like one of the things that we used when I was training to be a language specialist primary teacher was that we looked at loads of reports from like various sort of like NGOs and sort of international like organizations and stuff about the promotion of sort of language learning and all that sort of stuff. They've obviously, as part of their remit, have undertaken research to get some statistics about this and that, to sort of say, look, this is a good reason why people should be learning languages and whatever else. And I believe in language learning wholeheartedly. I think it's a brilliant sort of thing to undertake. But obviously the organizations that have undertaken that research and have got these facts and figures obviously have an agenda. It's an agenda I agree with, but they do have an agenda specifically to prove their point, to show the sorts of things that they're wanting to say, and to put their things in as positive a light as possible. Now, skeptically, it's like, well, there's that thing of like, I've not necessarily got a reason to disbelieve what they're saying, but you do have to take everything with a pinch of salt, don't you? It's like they do have an agenda that they're wanting to push.
So then I was gonna say the good thing with that is if you're really wanting to know more of like the truth of a matter, right? And yes, you're doing the study on linguistics and you have this like clearly biased agency, but you're getting all this data from it, is to be able to look and see where the counter information is. I think in research, in layman's research, I think that's what gets lost a lot is you'll have this question or this point of view and you'll research that point of view and like, okay, this is what I believe. Is there research out there to support it? Is it reasonable to believe this? Oh, look, there's like a whole body of research. So yeah, it's reasonable to believe, right? And so like what you say with the whole like, is there a reason to disbelieve it? I think one thing that's really important with good research is to look at it holistically and look at what information is out there that counters it, right? And so if the counter information isn't necessarily bad or doesn't necessarily have anything compelling against it, then that's really good in support of it. Like if you, I don't know, in my
There are very few do not learn foreign languages organizations that I could have found research for. So,
but you know what I'm saying? Like if there's an argument,
no,
if
I
there
know what you're
happens to
saying.
be an argument out there that says, hey, this is bad and here's why, take
Yeah.
a look at the argument. If that argument doesn't exist at all, then that's even more support in my
Well, I
opinion.
think
Yeah, and
similar, it'd be really easy for me to go from one NGO to another charity to another organization, an educational facility, all of which were saying the same things about language learning.
Right.
Therefore, me thinking, well, there is an overwhelming consensus, but all of those four things still have the same biases and the same motives as each other in the first place. And again, I don't think there's any controversy about language learning being a positive thing, but like,
no,
as an example, you see what I mean?
and agendas on in that case, and I've got one specifically in mind that is specifically to do with languages. They're not necessarily a bad thing. Agendas
Right.
aren't always bad.
It's about
And
understanding the agendas. What is this
Yeah,
person's
and
purpose? What is their
if you look
And
at
actually, in a lot of cases,
linguistics,
they were really clear with their agenda. Like,
Yeah.
we're saying
Yeah.
this because we want you to learn languages, you know.
definitely,
Right.
and not just that. If you have a look at the Scottish and Irish Gaelic, they're making a resurgence, and there's a huge push because at one time they were outlawed. You
Yeah.
couldn't speak those languages in those countries. And there's a huge resurgence to kind of reclaim that cultural identity by bringing those languages back. And that's not a bad thing. That is in no way a bad thing.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of like those kinds of agendas, like what you said, when you're talking about a resurgence or trying to hang on to something or trying to maintain something, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, right? Like I think what I don't remember which one of you said it, is how clear is the agenda? Like how outward are they? Are they secretive about it? Is it really hard to figure out? Is it hard to find? Are they open to challenging? So let's take the linguistics out of it and just say like just any, because I agree with you guys, you're not going to find a lot of counter information on that. But let's take something like just randomly a little bit more controversial, like whether or not a specific animal should be kept in that habitat or that habitat should be like bowled over and turned into a shopping mall, right? When you can challenge, when what am I trying to say? When the entity is open to challenge and open to say like, hey, give me counter evidence. Like, oh, you think it's okay to just ignore this or eliminate this duck habitat? Like, show me the data, show me why, right? Then
Well,
you know
there's
that they don't have a
like endangered bats in like derelict buildings, and they want to get rid of the building, but the bats are there.
exactly.
So there are people who say the bats need saving. There are people who are saying, yeah, but they're not as important as all the money we're going to make from this development.
How can
but
we relocate them? Yeah.
yeah, and I think it is one of those where you can do research into the benefits of moving the bats or the whatever else, but people would then, I guess, want to hide their bias that they're trying to get rid of the bats anyway and just find a good reason to do so.
Right. So that's the trick, right? Is like, how open is that organization or that individual or that research entity? How open are they to criticism and to arguments and stuff like that? Like,
Are they wanting to actually be convinced of a good argument against what they're saying?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is a good thing again with and I'm going to keep pushing this till the day I die, academic research, because the basics, one of the very first thing you're taught when you're formulating an academic argument is go out and find those opinions that disagree with you.
Exactly.
Take those on board, put them in your paper, and actually argue against them. Don't just pretend that they're not there. That's
or
bad.
If they're, yeah, it is bad academics. But I was gonna, like, not to interrupt, I keep doing that, but or be able to point them out as a shortcoming of your research, right? Like, sure, your research might be able to say, like, here's this counter stuff out there and here's my argument against it. But then there's also, here's my research and this is a potential limiting factor, or this is a potential issue that hasn't been resolved yet. For people to be able to put that in there and to be able to acknowledge that to me shows a lot of credibility, because they're basically showing where a chink or a hole or a weakness in their argument might potentially be, so that someone else can come around later and here's these two different arguments, they can like attack them more and maybe get at which one has more.
And those kinds of arguments and shortcomings are put forward in, if you'll have a look at a lot of research to do with the start of the universe or the start of life, abiogenesis. Those arguments are presented a lot in those papers. I've read a few of those papers, and they clearly state in the conclusion there is so much more research to do. Or psychology papers. I love psychology and neurology papers. And I've got quite a lot of benefit that my wife's doing a master's at the minute in educational psychology, so I just dip into a lot of her work and
you have exposure to it.
Nick those as resources. So, but in a lot of psychology papers, you get that. You said this is, consciousness is a prime example, because that's a huge open question at the minute in psychology, and that, there's so much more research to be done in this area is often stated in the conclusion, and they're putting forward ideas or hypotheses which need further investigation.
Which even that on its own, I think, gives the research itself more credibility, doesn't it? It's not like saying, I have got the answer. Here it is, guys. You can go home now. Like, saying, I have got these possible answers to this, but I'm wanting to do more here. Other people can do more there. Let's work it out. I think really does give, credibility ingredients to the thing that they're saying.
Yeah. I think this is now a good time to stop for the commercial break. But when we get back, I'd be really interested to hear about your guys' thoughts on interpreting research and interpreting data. I know Gil had said something earlier about like, and he had made it up, like the 40% of, or when you have your cell phone under your pillow, you're 40% more likely to die from
as well. People are going to come away from this video, and that's all they'll remember.
Yeah. By the way, he made that up. But what I'm trying to say is, like, sometimes research is really, really hard to interpret, and sometimes the results are interpreted this way or that way in order to support a claim, but they could technically be interpreted both ways. So, off to commercial break, and then I would love to hear what you guys think about that kind of stuff.
So, what are we up to this week? Well, the same as last week, my calendar is pretty empty.
Oh no, book them now, guys. Book them now.
If you want to, I'm more than happy to jump in and I'll come and just talk in my droney, not all exciting voice. I
want to see Gil get in on some stuff, because you have so much to bring to the table. Like, why are you not all over the place right now?
I don't know, because I'm one of those people that it really adds value to whatever I take part in. So,
I agree, whether you're being serious or not.
You really do, because the thing is, me and Laura sit here and we drone on, and we just kind of drone on and talk over each other and just chatterbox all the time, and then you will just jump in with the kind of most funny anecdote, which really livens everything up. It's
more real wisdom. Yeah.
Wisdom, that's it.
But, so, wisdom. Guys, start hitting Gil up. Let's get him out there.
So I'm not doing anything. Gil's obviously not doing anything. Laura, obviously, as usual, is the busy one out of us. On Sunday, June the 13th, she's on the non-profits again. On Tuesday, June the 15th, she's in the Meet the Crew in the ACA Discord. So that's a absolutely wonderful place where you get to meet everybody who's involved with the ACA and get to find out a little bit about the people behind the scenes
And we all
not
chit
just the
chat
people
live, so it's a live conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so if you can get along to that, and we'll put all the necessary links in the description, and you can go along and watch more Laura. We also have this wonderful little community of our own, which Mr. Gill is about to tell you about.
Sorry, Richard, were you talking then? I was just distracted on my phone on the official
He's
discussion.
Facebooking on our discussion group.
You see, that's it. And you can see, look, we've got some little, it's not focusing, but there's little cartoons of us at the top, so you know it's the real deal. And it's a wonderful place with some wonderful people talking about wonderful things. If you've not yet joined, please do so. We would love to have you join us, and to have regular chats, chit chats, and discussions. And you can find the link to that and all of our other platforms for just everything on our Linktree page, which is linktree/Skeptic Hangout, and that'll be in the description as well.
All right. On those notes, let's go ahead and jump right back to the show. All right. Welcome back from the commercial break. And we're just going to jump right back into it. What I had
I've already forgotten what question you asked.
Perfect. I'll say it again because I love repeating myself. Yeah. So before the break, I'd asked, like, not really asked a question, but more like presented something to talk about. And I'll tell you a little story for why that I think it's significant. But basically, it involves like, how do you guys go about interpreting the data when you're doing research, like the actual data itself, not the paper around it or the published journals around the paper, but the actual data. So I was reading back when I was still a Muslim. I was reading up on miswak, which is like the little stick, the siwak stick that they use to brush their teeth. And I wanted to know whether or not like there's any credence to the claim that that's a really good form of oral hygiene. And some people would even claim that it was better than brushing your teeth with toothpaste. So I read a study, and it was done by a Muslim, and it showed like the amount or the percentage of plaque reduction for regular teeth brushing versus brushing with miswak. And to its credit, it did talk about the different limitations. Like, one, there's the bias because the researcher was Muslim. Two is the lack of other research done on this topic. Like, it was the only study of its kind. Yeah. And three was that the differences were really minimal. But what they found was slightly more plaque overall was reduced by using the miswak than by using the toothbrush. But the results were so minimal. It was like a very, I can't remember what the percentage was, but it was a very, very, very small percentage.
Imagine doing loads of research and your conclusion is it doesn't really matter.
Right. But what I'm saying is that the conclusion that was brought up was that, hey, it does show that it's slightly better than brushing your teeth, or it suggests that it's slightly better than brushing your teeth. And what I found is that sometimes when doing research, the actual numbers, it's like, oh, if you eat this kind of food before doing this kind of workout, you're more likely to burn fat faster, right? But what you find out is like the percentage is like, oh, it was like 25% without this food and 27% with this food. Like
where the benefits definitely do not outweigh the thing of having to go to the supermarket to get the food to prepare the food.
I mean, if you want to spin it in such a negative way, yeah.
Yeah.
But my whole thing is that, like, to me, that's almost like statistically insignificant, and yet it's still being presented as, oh, look, this is a benefit. How do you know it was really that big of a benefit? Like, so anyway,
I think that's one of the things you've got to look at, isn't it? The bias and the why the paper's being presented, who's commissioned the paper to begin with. And of course, all good papers do have like declarations of bias. I was reading something on it was something to do with Buddhism. I don't know what it was, a paper to do with Buddhism recently. And it was written by a monk, and it said, you know, we declare bias because XXX. And it's good when you get that kind of thing. It reinstills confidence in you reading the paper that those people are willing to say that. But touching on the numbers thing, you know, you might have a health food company who's promoting a certain kind of food, and it might only be a percentage difference in the benefits of it. But when they've paid for the research and they're trying to sell a product, that percentage can be easily spun as you set into, this is more beneficial for you, this is healthier for you.
And you don't even have to report that percentage, because if it was 0.01% higher, then it's higher, and that's all you need to tell people.
Right. And that the other thing is, even when it's something like, oh, I want to measure whether or not algae grows faster in this environment or that environment, right? It's interesting to me that we do not know all of the variables that can possibly be tested for algal growth in every environment possible. We're just narrowing it to these two. And then the differences are like, oh, this seems to grow more here than it did here. It seems to me it's like, but what other, because it's such a small percentage, or because the numbers are so close, oh, it's 17% here and 23% there. I mean, that could seem like a really significant number depending on how you spin it, but it's like, yeah, but what about all the other factors that went into it, and all the other, I mean, to me it gets so difficult to know when the numbers even matter at all.
Yeah.
And they can be so focused, like the thing you were saying about like eat this food before you work out and it's proven to burn this many more calories or whatever. But like, you don't necessarily, that study that proved that, and again, you were making that up, so
yeah.
it's not even, but like
all of what I've said I've made up so far, except the meat story.
Every single word. But like the study that proved that it was more benefit, you burn more calories by eating that thing, was only focusing on that one aspect of eating that thing, and may have like overlooked completely any negative effects in other non-calorie burning areas of whatever. So like,
right,
yeah, you can take it at face value that, okay, that has that effect and it is positive or negative in this way, but you just don't know all the variables of other things which it may affect, because that wasn't in the scope of the study.
Or it had a positive effect for, say, 20% of the participants and no effect whatsoever on the rest of them. Right?
So overall positive, and on average positive,
but not positive for every single person. Like, it's not a across the board physiological truth that that this particular food has this particular benefit, and it's so complicated, like different physiologies and different like health.
That's where lifestyles. It's important to look into larger research as well, though, isn't it? Yeah. Because sometimes we've mentioned the work of Dr. Julia Shaw before, who implanted memories into people, and 70% of the people in her study had memories successfully false memories successfully implanted into them, and that was really significant for that study. Yeah, it was so it's numbers may sometimes have disparity, but it depends what the study is as well, and the circumstances surrounding it and the wider picture.
Well, and that's why I ask what your guys' specific takes are on it. Because for me, when I read the research, I do look for like, how significant is this number? What does it actually mean? So like for more
reasons for consuming research as well, isn't there? In terms of like whether you are looking at it for a university course, or whether you're looking at it in terms of which of these muesli bars am I wanting to buy. Like, it's different context, and if I see a health claim on the front of a box of cereal, I'm definitely not going to be looking into those numbers, because I do not give enough of a shit about it.
Do I like the cereal or do I not like the cereal?
Yeah,
yeah. No, that is a good point. Like, how important is the research to you? Yeah. But there were some things that I found were like really misleading. Like oh my God, I'm gonna say it wrong. The gyre, the North American gyre or gyre. It's the in the ocean. There's like the currents that go and they meet, and because they meet, they create sort of like the circular. And we're talking on a global scale. It's this huge global current, and it comes and it meets, and it creates this sort of like a swirl. And there's several swirls around the world in these oceans. And the North American, I think they're called gyres. The North American gyre.
Is that one of those words you've read but never known how to say it out loud?
Exactly. Yeah, I need to watch some documentaries where they pronounce it's Gyre. So it's either gyre or gyre or gyre. I don't know. I'm gonna say gyre. Someone correct me. Yeah, if you have a correction, record yourself and put it on Facebook of how it's supposed to sound. But they were talking about trash in the oceans and how they're collecting in these gyres. And they talk about the North American gyre and how it's basically like just this big trash island, right? And they talk about the amount of tons. Like, they actually kind of guesstimate the amount of trash using whatever mathematical formula they use. And there's X amount of trash in these gyres, and it sounds huge. And then I watch a documentary, and it goes, and they're writing through them, and it's like, there's a piece of trash, and there's one over there, and there's a clump, and there's some bottles floating, and they're really spread out, and it's not like you get this image of like this hard island of floating
like
trash.
On WALL-E, like on the Disney film WALL-E, where they've got the massive like
right.
of rubbish all piled up. Yeah.
Yeah. And now it's still bad that all this trash is in the ocean. I'm not saying, oh, it's no big deal. It's still a big deal. But the image that I got in my head based on the descriptions of it and based on the actual numbers and the data was not accurate to what it actually looks like when you're on a boat riding through the gyre and like looking at all. And they would pull trash out and sample it and stuff. I guess most of the trash is like microplastics. So you can pull like a sample of water and there's like little beads of plastic floating around in there. And that's significant. That's bad. But it's not this hard packed solid island that you're
But again, it's
imagining.
that thing of like intent, isn't it? Like
Right.
they want you to think about worst case scenario with those statistics and those numbers, don't they? Because they want you to therefore take action on it because you have that emotive response.
Right.
And I guess they're not necessarily hiding that because again, most people would agree that that's a worthy sort of ambition to have on their part.
And bringing skepticism into it, I think the thing is, if you if you have
Bring it around.
if you have a look at the kind of, if you're doing research into a paper or you're looking at a specific research paper, find out all the information. So what journal is it in? How many times has it been cited? Who's funded the paper? Blah, 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 blah. All this stuff is really important to take into account, especially if you're going to form a conclusion from it, or if you're going to use it as evidence for something. And, and take as much information in as possible. It does, look at it with a skeptical eye and say, does this matter to me? Is it a cereal bar that it's just going to taste a bit different to another one? Or is it going to be, am I going to be using this? Am I going to be using this as a part of an argument for something? We said in the last episode about Christianity. To us, Jesus really doesn't matter to us.
Whether or not he was historical or actually.
Yeah, it's
but then if I'm making life decisions based on things I believe in other areas, it's important to do your research and to understand.
Jesus is the cereal bar of history. Yeah. It doesn't really matter. But when you're talking about things, if you're trying to formulate an argument, if I'm writing a paper and I for my professor at university to read, and I'm trying to form a specific argument, it's very important to take all these little different tiny bits of different things into account.
Yeah, and also when you were talking about the your paper and stuff like that, it's also to identify your own shortcomings. Like for example, my paper, my final paper that I did, I had to have a thesis statement, and my thesis statement was that I think that I believe that atheists will largely cite scientific and practical reasons for their atheism, not a dislike of religion or anything like that. And my data happened to support that. After I did all the surveys and stuff like that, it really strongly supported, like, not convinced by the arguments, no historical context, doesn't jive with scientific facts. So in that particular case, my hypothesis was supported by the conclusions. But if throughout your research you find that your hypothesis is not supported, there is where it's incredibly important to be to have academic integrity and to point that out and be like, oh, I went into this study, and I've read lots of papers that do this. We went into this study thinking A, B, and C, and we actually found D, E, and F, right?
Whereas it'd be really easy for you as the researcher to be like, actually, I did an interview with Jeff, and Jeff didn't really match with what I was wanting to say, so let's ignore the fact that I interviewed Jeff. Let's move on to the next person. It'd be really easy without that academic integrity like you were talking about.
Oh yeah, that would be a really dishonest way of.
I want to jump in really, well, I'll say really quick. I hope it's really quick with some things. I want to move on to something else after.
Sure.
When we're writing papers, when we're looking at papers, but mainly when we're writing papers, what we tend to do is have the conclusion in mind and then build an argument to reach the conclusion.
Exactly. Yeah.
However, sometimes that's when outside of research, academic research, when you're trying to form an argument, that's usually the worst way to do it from the perspective of skepticism. For example, if you want to prove God, if you're looking at an argument for God and you start with the conclusion for God and you work backwards and you take the data that supports that, and ignore the data that doesn't, that's a really bad way of making a philosophical argument. It's a really backwards way of doing it. So really, it depends what kind of thing you're doing as well, because the methodology can be the same, but it can be really bad for depending on what argument you're trying to make, or it can be really good if you're just trying to put an argument forward. If you're trying to say something is real, that's it, and this is the proof that it's real, it's a really bad way to go about it.
Right.
If you're forming an argument, having an idea of your conclusion is a good idea.
Yeah. Because I think then you're going to pick out those bits that are stronger in your favor and leave out the bits which are weaker in, I can't speak, which sort of go against what you're trying to say. And it's just, it leaves you presenting a view which is incomplete. And which is, I mean, it's cherry picking, isn't it? Like, just, it's not an accurate representation of what it is. You're not necessarily lying. You're not necessarily actually like twisting things or making up numbers or anything like that. But it's just, very focused in a very narrow direction.
Yeah, and if you did that in an academic paper, it'd be
get
a
slaughtered.
really bad way to,
Yeah. Well, and that's where I'm a little bit curious, because you had said sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. In my opinion, I mean, yes, there's times where it's just not reasonable to do all the research and have everything like right there in front of you. Like when you're trying to convince your kids to eat Raisin Bran instead of like Frosted Flakes or whatever. Just being able to say, hey, it's healthier, and just leave it at that. Like I can kind of get where you want to just have your conclusion up front and then find the research to back it up versus challenging that. But I think in all the cases that I can think of, I can't think of an actual real case where it would be a good idea to have your conclusion first and then try to find the research to back it up. Like, in my opinion, we should always have sort of like this open mind that we could be wrong. Like, what if Raisin Bran is actually less healthy and we just don't know it?
I don't mean have your conclusion. What I mean is have an idea of what your conclusion will be and work towards that. And if you find stuff that counters that,
and be willing to diverge.
That's what I meant. Sorry, I probably didn't phrase it properly.
Or maybe I just heard it wrong, but I was like, well, under what circumstances is it a good idea to be this is what I think, and I'm going to back it up, and then I'm not going to challenge it.
I meant have your conclusion in mind, from the idea, and then do your research. And if your research doesn't form the conclusion, then be willing to change your mind. That's where the skepticism comes in.
A similar sort of scenario, but slightly different. I know you were trying to think, Laura, in terms of how could this be a thing. Sometimes if you're doing that sort of descriptive sort of research, it can be like that, can't it? So like, I have found this thing happens, or I've found that this is the way something is. Let's research how that happens, or why this gets that place. So that's a similar way where you do start with the finished product and you're working your way towards it. But it's a slightly different thing to concluding something.
No, but that does answer my question. I think that's a really good point, because in my mind, I was like, no, it's totally black and white. Like, you have to always be willing to change your mind. But you're right, in terms of describing something or better understanding something that you witnessed or that you're going through. Like, a good example that I can think of is like mental health, right? Where, like, let's say I'm having like just a really bad depressed period, and I start like, here's how I'm feeling, here's my symptoms, here's what I'm going through, here are the types of conversations I'm having, to go and do some research, like, to better understand that. Like, my conclusion is already there. I conclude that I am experiencing A, B, and C. And I do that actually quite often, where I look for the research or the information that backs up what it is that I'm already witnessing or experiencing. So that's a good point.
Okay, let's move on to what I wanted to move on to then.
Yes, Mr. Gilliver.
We've talked about a lot of academic stuff today. I'm sure a lot of us listeners are bored silly.
Oh, yeah.
With it. Let's talk about shit research.
Or even just casual research.
Well, I want an example from you of what you consider of that you've come across from other people or yourself, if you've done this yourself and gone out and it's just been really, really bad research, and the argument that's been presented is based entirely on crap research.
I have two answers off the top of my head, so I'm gonna let Gil go first.
Well, no, I have zero answers.
Right. So the first one would be flat Earth, right? Especially when I was first interested in that, and I was like, ooh, I want to know what the argument is. I didn't look for both sides, and I didn't buy into that argument. I specifically was deliberately researching just that side because I wanted to understand the argument and what they thought. But for like an average person to just go in and be like, "Ooh, I wonder if the earth is flat and if this is really a conspiracy," to only look at the positive side of flat earth, like the arguments for flat earth, and not to challenge them, not to look at any arguments, like a lot of their arguments are really obviously scientifically flawed, and it's not hard to tear them apart, but you have to be willing to understand the science between like how do you determine that something as large as the earth is a sphere, right? It's you do look across like the desert or look across the ocean and it appears flat-ish, right? So you do have to be a little bit deliberate about it. So that one is one where you could really obviously do just crap research by only looking at the side that supports the flat earth.
And very much on the surface of that all that information.
Yes, and to not challenge any of the claims made, like, oh, you can't fly, you can't circumnavigate the world, and there's a whole argument about like flight patterns and airports and stuff like that, and the GPS and everything. To not look into that and just be like, oh, that's really compelling, that's interesting. Wow, vast airport conspiracy, right? Yeah, to not dig any deeper. The other one is the entire Ancient Aliens TV series. It's just can I cuss really quick? It's just
please do,
fucking
because I'm going
bullshit. It's bullshit. The research is bad. In some cases, it's lying or deliberately presenting falsehoods. It's incredibly bad science. And to just watch something like the Ancient Aliens and be like, oh, I saw it on TV. It was on the History Channel, so it's got to have some sort of, like scientific or historical veracity to it. They wouldn't put stuff on TV that's not legit because they're the History Channel, right? It's just such garbage. And yeah, so Gilliver, take it away.
Eric von Daniken has got a lot to fucking answer for with the Chariots of the Gods. if you're unfamiliar, just avoid it. It was a book written in, I don't know whether it was the 60s or 70s. It was probably the 70s, where the guy made a lot of correlation between ancient monuments or ancient pictographs and things, or geoglyphs, and ancient aliens visiting us. And then some people have taken it and ran with it, and
like a religion almost.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we now have the Ancient Aliens TV series, which is shit.
Well, the problem is,
I don't have strong feelings on it, but wank.
It's presented as factually accurate, and that's what pisses me off, because now you have people who don't know any better, who don't even have the time or the drive to do the research, that are just going to watch it and be like, wow, that's really compelling.
Because
that really makes a lot of sense.
Sort of TV program format for this is factual information. Like it set up in a very specific way on the screen and said in a very specific way, that sounds really plausible, because we're used to seeing legitimate academic programming presented in the same way.
And what really gets me about it, I didn't intend for this to turn into
You're
this
so
low
welcome,
as fault.
audience.
This is low as fault. What really annoys me about it, beyond all other things, is that in almost every episode, I don't know why I watch it, because it's shit.
It's so entertaining. We'll get to that in a second.
In almost every episode, they'll literally talk about something so stupidly ridiculous, and they'll say, the academic community don't think this is the case, but we do. Just fucking don't bother then. Just leave us alone.
Yeah. Well, and like what is it? Giorgio Tsoukalos with the whole like, it could be. I'm not saying it is, but it could be extraterrestrials. It's like, but
just trying to present this ridiculous idea. Anyway, let's get off that.
I would just say, like, in terms of Ancient Aliens, it's great entertainment if you take it as entertainment, but when it's presented as facts, like, that's bad research. That's bad.
Here's an example that I've come across quite a lot recently, because I'm on TikTok far too often, and I'm enjoying atheist TikTok, and there's lots of people who do like response videos to this one guy I've seen who says like, here's the proof of Jesus, and then there's like a photo of the Mount of Olives where Jesus ascended to heaven. There's a picture of a piece of wood in a frame in a church somewhere that says like a piece of Jesus's cross. There's a like a definitely like medieval and not at all like 2,000-year-old tomb that's all ornamental and whatever else, saying Jesus' tomb. But then there's people responding it like, here is King's Cross Station, proof that Harry Potter is real, you know? And it's that thing, like, and again, it's not on the same level as what you're talking about, and it's certainly not like research in a sort of academic sense, but it's one of those where it's a really accessible way people think like, oh yeah, look, all these things do match, you know, it's the right place and it's the right things, and that was mentioned and this was mentioned, and it's that whole idea of surface level, isn't it? Like it's all surface level stuff that kind of is in the same sort of direction, but
at least with that, to be fair, at least with that, there is a long tradition in Christianity of martyrdom, and you know, especially during the Middle Ages, there were there were really lots of pieces of people's skulls, relics of people's skulls that people went to see. People, you know, there were authentic things. Like Thomas a Becket is there was an authentic shrine to him in the Middle Ages, and then there were obviously then the claims of like pieces of the True Cross or the fucking Shroud of Turin and stuff like that. So Laura's got me cursing.
You're so welcome, guys. I had to spice the show up eventually. It took till episode 15, but you know.
But yeah, there are some truths and some things to that. It's not the same level as ancient fucking aliens. Not.
So you bring up a really good point. Okay, so we're talking about research, right? And when I was a Christian, my whole stance was if a religion is true, whichever religion it happens to be, it's going to comport with reality and the facts are going to support that religion, or the religion is false. So one thing that kept me in Christianity far longer than I should have been is exactly that. It's the bad research. It's here's this archaeological site. This is the Wall of Jericho, and this is like the city of, I don't even know off the top of my head, but like
you always see reports, don't you, of like we found the city of Sodom, or we found that, you know, and like all this,
or there's like chariot wheels under the Red Sea, which is proof of the Exodus, right? First of all, some of that research is bullshit, and some of it is just misrepresented. And some of it is potentially kind of intriguing. Like, yeah, some of biblical history corresponds with actual historical sites. And so there is sort of like this bit of overlap where it is really compelling.
Like but Jerusalem was a place where Jews were.
Like, right.
Fine.
Good, cool. Proof of Jesus. Right. But I mean, that's part of what kept me religious for so long, was being able to go to scholars and not knowing the difference between good scholarship and bad scholarship, and not knowing what the controversies were, and not looking at both sides. Like once I found a source that supported my idea, I tended to stick toward that source. Like there was half a second where I followed Kent Hovind's teachings and I was like, that's compelling, right?
I guess as a Christian that you've also got the Bible, which is assumed to be a correct source of evidence as well. Right. It's like yeah, you've only got that one other source of evidence, but it's backing up this other source of legitimate evidence in the Bible that you've already got. So it's like, whereas obviously we don't necessarily view the Bible in the same way in terms of its historical accuracy for research purposes.
The thing is, though, I've got to just jump in and play devil's advocate here, but I think atheists looking into historical research of the Bible are just as guilty as shit research. Because true. There's the amount of times I've seen, and there's nothing wrong with this scholar. He's absolutely brilliant. I'm not disparaging the scholar. It's the way people use him. The amount of times people jump in and quote Bart Ehrman.
I knew you were going to say his name. Yeah.
And because he's so popular, he's really, really good at what he does. He's so popular. But so many times I see people jump in and say, oh, Bart Ehrman says this, Bart Ehrman says that, Bart Ehrman says the other. And it's all one-sided. There are some really, really, really good, unbiased, Christian believing scholars out there. And there's nothing wrong with using their work just because the Christian believing. You don't have to jump on this one. And it really is a celebrity kind of scholar.
And his stuff is really, really easy to read too.
It's easy to read, and it is really good.
Yeah.
I don't want to make out like I've got anything against Bart Ehrman because he's really good at what he does.
But you're talking about crap research. Just read one of his books and say, okay, now I'm an expert on Christian history.
Which a lot of people do, and that's what I'm trying to get at. There are a lot of people from the atheist side who will read. I've literally seen people speak and say, well, Bart Ehrman says this, and Bart Ehrman says that, and Bart Ehrman says the other, and Bart Ehrman says this, so therefore. And you're like, that's just shit research, mate. You can't just read from one author and draw a conclusion about the whole of early Christianity.
So
unless though you read that one author and delve into his bibliography and delve into all the sorts of research, and you go through all of that. But that's a completely different thing, like you said, than just taking something on face value because you've read that book and you paid $12.99 for the book in the first place. So, I mean, it must be worth it.
But that is exactly the point I was going to make, is when you read a single person's work, that is somewhere to start from. That is not somewhere to draw conclusions from, right? So they've already drawn their own conclusions, but their conclusions are not necessarily automatically correct. Like look at Eric von Daniken, like we were talking about. You have to be at least a little skeptical about anybody, even if they're experts in the field. Is where do they get their information, and can you check their cited resources, and can you delve a little bit deeper into it? What are the counter arguments? So
we've talked more about how you can take statistics and make them say whatever you're wanting to. There's certainly someone's conclusions based on data, even if you accept that their data is accurate, may be completely different to the conclusions that you or anyone else might make as well.
And on that point, and sticking with Bart Ehrman, I just for a quick second, I've read in one of his books that I can't remember what he was talking about, but it made reference to something being the earliest copy of something when it was trying to formulate a point. And I've actually seen, and I need to do further research on this. It's really recently I've read this, but in the footnotes of one of the Bibles, which and again, really good scholars who've translated this Bible, and the footnotes, it actually says there are earlier accounts of that. So that's something I want to go into, because Bart Ehrman's assessment doesn't seem to match the assessment of these other scholars. And I want to dive in there and really get into it. And
and well, that's another thing too, is to understand that like scholars can get things wrong, or they can be mistaken, or they can be flawed. Like when you think in terms of the books that he writes, he's going through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of references. So even if he is trying his hardest to be 100% correct and not deliberately present false facts, he can still accidentally present false facts, and things do slip through the cracks. So you're right, being able to catch little things like that and say, oh, okay, it's not necessarily to discredit the specific academic. It's for me to have a better understanding. What is the actual information out there? And I think a lot of times casual research ends at the end of the first article, or the end of the first book. Or
I want to be the best academic I can. And it's, I get a lot of flack from people sometimes because they'll say to me, well, you do all this research and you can't name Bible and verse. I'm really bad at kind of giving the memorization. But you've got to bear in mind, I'm not just a Christian. I'm not just researching Christian stuff. I'm researching Islam. I'm researching Christianity. I'm researching Buddhism. They're the three primary areas, on top of kind of all the philosophical and ethical stuff too, I do. So they're my three primary areas. The Buddhist canon itself is fucking big.
More than just a Bible.
That's a lot of work to go through. I can't sit there. I tend to remember and memorize gists and general ideas rather than chapter and verse.
I'm the same way.
That's something I get a lot of flack for from people, especially who I'm having discussions with, who might have a contrary point to me. I don't care. And if you did as much research as I did, you wouldn't be able to memorize chapter and verse either.
And it wouldn't even necessarily be that important. Okay, so here's where I'm going to give my closing thoughts, because you just like inspired me with this. But then I want to hear your guys' closing thoughts. For me, research isn't always about having all the information off the top of your head. It's not about memorizing a bunch of facts. It's not about knowing the specific dates of everything. Sometimes research is knowing where a body of knowledge sits and how to find it and how to reference it if you need it. So like you said, having a general idea of a topic, having an understanding of it that's maybe a little bit more than surface level deep, and then knowing where to go to. Like I've forgotten so much about Islam that people will ask me questions off the top of my head that I can't answer anymore. I could have at the time. And I just like that thing that I got wrong versus like the bring me a verse versus bring me a chapter, right? Like a lot of it has fled. But knowing where to go to find the answers, I think is a really important part of ongoing research. Not, I mean, when you're talking about writing a paper, then yes, you need it right there in front of you. You need to capture it. You need to write it down. But just for a regular everyday person learning about a topic, it's almost more important to know where to go to get the answers than to try to memorize absolutely everything and have it right off the top of your head. That's my closing thought.
I think I wanted to wrap background to something that I was on about earlier, thinking about research in terms of biases. And I think it's important to not only ourselves, if we're undertaking research, but also if we're accessing and sort of consuming research that other people have done, is to recognize that we all do have biases, whether we want to let them affect what we're doing or not. And biases don't necessarily make something false or make something true, but as long as you've got that sort of idea in the back of your head when you're seeing and trying to understand that information, it can put you along the right path, hopefully.
For myself, again, exactly what Richard says. If I'm doing research into something, bias is acutely at the front of my attention. Am I taking something in context? Am I taking, especially with the religious research, because I'm not a religious person, and I notice so often when I come across religious textual arguments or textual criticisms that my bias automatically kicks in, and I want to dismiss things because I'm not a believer in that particular religion, and I fight that all the time. And it's something I'm always aware of. But in general, I have to implore people in general, if this is the most important thing for me regarding research, it's the one takeaway I have to give people. If you see a headline, if you were drawn into a headline, whether it's a magazine, a newspaper, whether it's an online article, whether it's a more academic article, don't just be drawn in and see the headline and think, that's it, that's the answer I need, or that's the answer I want to that question. Delve deeper. As Richard mentioned with Bart Ehrman, or I'm not sure if it was Richard Laura mentioned with Bart Ehrman, don't just read his opinion. Look at the bibliography. Look at where he's got that information from. Do that little bit extra. You don't have to be an academic. You don't have to be a scholar. Just do that little bit extra. Just get under the surface and
just open the link rather than stopping at the headline.
Or at the very least, like, reserve judgment, right? Like, if you think you understand something and you haven't delved enough into it, just admit you haven't delved enough into it. Like, I don't know are powerful words.
I don't know is our mantra, man.
Okay, so we talked a lot today in terms of research on the academic side. So I think on the Facebook page, it would be really awesome to delve into the more casual research side, like things like, how do you know about the COVID vaccine, like as a layperson? What's good, what's bad about it? Should I get it? Should I not get it? Like, how do you do that kind of research? So I would love to extend the conversation onto Facebook about casual non-academic research.
I'd also like to know if anyone's done any, like I was geeking out about my linguistics research and stuff. Just, has anyone done any interesting research that they want to talk about? Because I think people often research things that they're passionate about, and it's always good to talk about people who are passionate about what they're doing.
Yes. So thank you guys all for joining us. Share your ideas. I can't wait to hear from you guys on Facebook. But in the meantime, we are Laura,
Richard,
and Richard, and this has been Skeptic Hangout. Until next time,
keep questioning,
interrogate your beliefs,
and stay skeptical.
Bye.
Bye.